We all know who Steven Wilson is at this point. He is one of the most recognizable figures in the progressive rock community at this time, even though he wouldn't really want to say so. He has innovated and really pushed the music forward within the 90s and 2000s, and even now in the 2010s. He really got his debut start in Porcupine Tree, and then doing numerous projects from there, such as No Man, Blackfield, Storm Corrosion, and producing and remastering countless albums. So when he finally decided to try his hand at his own official solo project, well, that's what we have here. Insurgents by Steven Wilson. As with many artists who try their hand at a solo project, a lot of the songs on this album feel not quite at home, and in some ways this works to its advantage, actually. Overall, this album, unlike all of other Steven Wilson's projects, at least in terms of his solo projects, this one is the least stable and the least cohesive. Like all the albums that come after this, and those I will be talking about in later weeks, but they all have a unifying feel. Like they all feel at home on the album. Here on Insurgents, these guys feel almost as though it's the Island of Misfits songs, as though they were written in tandem with a lot of other music that just didn't feel like it was right there. And that feeling is really what is captured on this album. And that's what I really actually love about this album, is just how pleasantly unsettling a lot of the music is on this album. And I will admit, it took a long time for me to actually get into this album as much as I have. This was a lot different than a lot of the music that I had heard up to this point in his career. I had really only known Blackfield and Porcupine Tree, and this felt like it was a darker approach to some of the music that he was putting out in, say, like The Lightbulb Sun, Signify, even Stupid Dream. And kicking us all off is one of his more famous works, or at least most recognizable works, of Harmony Korine. And Harmony Korine is a brilliant filmmaker. Like he's more of an artist, I would say, than a filmmaker, that just chose his medium of style as film. And Steve is a huge fan of his. Harmony has done such works as Trash Humpers, as well as Gummo, but his biggest work to date, and I think the last work that he's really done, was Spring Breakers back in 2012. Steven has used a lot of his, I guess, visual styles, but more in a musical presentation. Like, things aren't quite feeling right. Like, there's always this kind of unsettling feeling. And the music video for Harmony Korine is just like a mind trip with all the different like animal heads and weird visuals. But at that point in Steven's career, that's kind of par for the course as well. And for the longest time, this was the only song off of the album that I really connected with and I really liked. And it was like the general build with the slow start of the guitars that slowly build with the haunting vocals of Steven, and then finally bringing it up into the chorus, and you have that chugging guitars and more of a realized kind of format for the music at that point. And then what I really enjoy of this song is the end part, where you have that little bit of a drum fill, and whenever I see this song live, I always gush with that end drum fill. Just the drum work on that. I mean, on the studio album, I believe it's Gavin Harris that does the tracks on that. Yeah, Gavin Harrison does the drumming on the studio album, but on a live, it's actually Marco Minion, and he just gives it a whole new breath of life. Anyway, once we get to that drum filler, it goes right into the chorus again, and that plethora of music, that inertia that brings us through, that was the star performer, at least for me, on this album. And I will say, unfortunately, for the longest time, that was the big highlight. Like, after that, it just didn't quite feel, I don't know, like it never really met that same high mark. And I guess that's probably because it's the most accessible track. The rest of the tracks on here, take a lot longer to get into, like Abandoner, the second track on this album. When I first heard this, I didn't quite get it. Like, it started off very, very somber and very quiet with just kind of a synthesized drum track, almost like a drum machine. And it almost felt like a Tom York song, like from his Eraser album. And it wasn't until much later that I started to really understand where this album was going with this, in that it felt very comfortable and very soothing, but at the same time, when we get to the end part where we've got that blast of sound, diving into this detachment of kind of the self. Now, another treat on this album is the third song of Salvaging. This guy, I love the bass line of this, like the one that's really hunkered down. It reminded me very much of Timothy's Monster from Motorcycle. There's also a song off of Amnesia from Radiohead. It's that same kind of bass line, that doon 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 doon. And I love how, again, disjointed this song is while also being very comfortable. Like, it's got a great uncanny valley feel to it. Time to resist. And it's interesting because the fourth track is actually perfectly placed after Salvaging of, and I know I'm going to butcher this one, I'm sorry, Venero Paralahitis. This guy is the most soothing song off of this entire collection of tracks. Like when it's just that, and it's like all intersynced within the music. It's a real letdown in a good way from such a heavy hitting tracks such as The Abandoner and Salvaging. And then of course we come into the fifth track of No Twilight Within the Courts of the Sun. This guy is one of those like really strange but fun tracks. I love the time signature on this. It's really gut-wrenching and hard-hitting at the end, and it's like that, almost like a cacophony of sound near the end. It's just really interesting. And it's paired very well with also Significant Other. And I think the most realized song outside of Harmony Korine was The Only Child. It's a lot less of an experiment. It's much more of like a realized song, like something that could have been felt on, say, not quite Deadwing, but maybe in Absentina, something along those sides of like the Porcupine Tree discography. And then with Twilight Coda, the eighth track, this feels more like Venero, but instead of being soothing, it's very haunting. Like this one, I can almost picture being in like a graveyard or something, which then goes very well into Get All of Your Deserves. I mean, it's weird because it feels like with these two tracks, it could have ended here, but we do have the last song of Insurgents, and Insurgents does a very interesting way of closing everything off, very finalized note in that sense. You betray your thoughts, all your prayers to Lord. And so, even though this album does feel like it's a little bit of a Misfit Toys island at times, the songs do feel very similar to one another as well. It's a very interesting work, and one that it did take me quite a while to really get into. And it's interesting because Steven did release a remixed album of Remix. Like, he took out all the vowels for it. And I really, really love the Salvaging remix, where it takes a while for it to build, and then when we finally get it, it's really, really juicy and really heavy hitting. There are moments on the remixes that I enjoy more than the finalized product that we have here on the release. So it's one of the very few instances where I like the remix versions more than I like the studio albums. So overall, this is a really interesting album for me to rate because it is kind of all over the place, and the more I've listened to it, the more I've grown to appreciate the songs. Out of all the albums up to this point, it is the weakest out of all of them. And that's probably just Steven feeling comfortable playing by himself instead of playing with others. And the fact that he's not writing for somebody else and he's not kind of sharing the spotlight. This is him in his own world, just kind of sandboxing himself. So my final rating for this album would definitely have to be more along the lines of stream this album. And with the passing of time, it does ferment and it does raise the enjoyment factor out of the songs a little bit more. So that's about it for Steven Wilson's Insurgents. What did you guys think? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Let me know of your own thoughts about this album by commenting down below. Thank you guys so much for watching. This album is being done in preparation for Steven Wilson's next studio album, which is To the Bone. That's being released in August. So that's about it from me. Thank you guys so much for watching. You guys are definitely the best. And until next time, notes out.